Picture the people you trust the most. The successful businessman 2 doors down, the family doctor who delivered your children, the quiet husband who coaches the local team. We tell ourselves that evil looks like evil, that a monster would give itself away with one cold glance across a room. But the truth that should keep you awake is far worse than that. The most dangerous men in these stories did not hide in the shadows. They hid in plain sight, behind nice homes, good jobs, and the easy smiles of men nobody ever suspected. 5 men, 5 ordinary lives that turned out to be costumes, and 5 families who learned, far too late, that the person sleeping beside them was someone they never really knew at all. Before we begin, do one thing for me. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this channel does not look away, and neither should the truth. This is Dark Truth Crime. Case 1. The Quiet Millionaire. Fox Hollow Farm. Picture the most respectable man on your street. He owns a thriving business. He drives a nice car. He lives with his wife and 3 children on a sprawling estate. 18 acres of woods and riding trails wrapped around a $1 million home. He waves at his neighbors. He looks like the finish line of the American dream. Now imagine that every time his family left town for vacation, that same quiet man drove into the city, put on a different name, and came home with a stranger who would never be seen alive again. And imagine that the children playing in his backyard were running across unmarked graves. This is the story of Herb Baumeister. By every outward measure, he was a success. In the late 1980s, he and his wife, Juliana, who everyone called Julie, launched a chain of second-hand thrift stores called Save-A-Lot. The business took off, and in the spring of 1988, the family bought the property that would define his name forever, a former horse farm in Westfield, Indiana, called Fox Hollow Farm. To the people of Westfield, Herb was eccentric but harmless, a little awkward, a little distant, the kind of man who blended into the background of his own life. Nobody saw what was underneath. Nobody had a reason to. But across nearby Indianapolis, something was very wrong. Through the early 1990s, young men were vanishing, most of them gay men, in their 20s and 30s, last seen leaving bars in the downtown scene. They had families. They had jobs. They had people who loved them. And one by one, they disappeared. For years, almost nobody connected the cases. Decades later, the county coroner would say something that still stings. He said if these had been 8 young women from the wealthy suburbs, the search never would have stopped. The first crack in the silence came not from the police, but from a survivor, a man who had met a charming, well-dressed stranger at a bar called the 501. The stranger called himself Brian Smart and invited the man back to a massive estate outside the city. During that visit, the encounter turned violent, and the man barely escaped with his life. He never forgot the face, and in August of 1995, he saw Brian Smart again, driving through Indianapolis. This time he followed the car and wrote down the license plate. When investigators ran that plate, the name that came back was not Brian Smart. It was Herb Baumeister, the millionaire thrift store owner with the wife, the 3 kids, and the estate in Westfield. I am still here with you, and the deeper we go, the stranger this gets. There had already been one terrifying warning sign inside that home, and the family had no idea what it meant. In the autumn of 1994, Herb's young son had been playing in the woods behind the house when he found something half buried in the dirt. He carried it inside to show his parents. It was a human skull. Most people would have called the police that very hour, but Herb had an answer ready. His own father had been a physician, he reminded them, a man who kept medical specimens. The skull, he said, was just an old anatomical model he had buried while cleaning out the garage. His wife, unable to imagine the truth, accepted it, and the most important piece of evidence in the case was quietly tucked away for another 2 years. By the time police identified him, Herb's perfect life was already collapsing. The Save-A-Lot business was failing, and in January of 1996, after more than 20 years of marriage, Julie filed for divorce. When detectives asked to search the property, Herb refused and lawyered up. For months, they were stuck. Then, in June of 1996, with her husband out of town, Julie finally told investigators about the skull her son had found and gave them permission to search the grounds of Fox Hollow Farm. Scattered through the trees and the creek bed, investigators recovered more than 10,000 human bone fragments. This was not one crime. This was a years-long operation, hidden behind the walls of a respectable family home. The county coroner would later call it the second-largest investigation into unidentified human remains in the entire country, behind only the World Trade Center. But Herb Baumeister never sat in a courtroom. The moment he realized police were digging up his backyard, he ran, crossing the border into Ontario, Canada. On the 3rd of July, 1996, he took his own life in a provincial park. He left behind a 3-page note in which he complained about his failing business and his broken marriage. He never wrote a single word about the men who died on his land. For a long time, The world moved on, but the victims' families never did. And here is where this story turns from horror towards something close to hope. Starting in 2022, a newly elected county coroner reopened the entire case, armed with modern forensic genetic genealogy, a science that did not exist when these men disappeared. Investigators began pulling identities out of those broken fragments, one by one. Manuel Resendez, Jeffrey Jones, Alan Livingston, Roger Goodlett. And in the spring of 2025, a man named Daniel Thomas Halloran became the 10th victim to be given his name back. His daughter, who was not even 2 years old when he vanished, finally learned the truth about the father she never got to know. That work is still going on today. There are remains in this case that still have no name. Herb Baumeister built his entire identity on a lie of respectability, and he died still hiding behind it. But he does not get the last word. That belongs to the men he tried to erase, who are being pulled back into the light, one name at a time. Case 2. The Almost Perfect Murder. Dr. Martin MacNeill. Imagine being married to a man the whole community looks up to. He is a doctor. He also holds a law degree. He teaches at church on Sundays, and he provides a comfortable life for your 8 children in a quiet, gated neighborhood. You trust him with your health, your home, and your future. But behind the credentials and the religious devotion is a man who has been lying about almost everything, and who has decided that the simplest way out of his marriage is not divorce, but your death. Martin and Michelle MacNeill lived in Pleasant Grove, Utah. Michelle was a former beauty queen, a devoted mother, and the heart of the family. Martin, on paper, was untouchable, a physician and an attorney respected across the community. But underneath, much of his life was built on deception. By early 2007, after nearly 30 years of marriage, Martin was involved in an affair with a woman named Gypsy Willis, and he wanted his wife gone so he could start a new life. What he did next was cold and calculated. He pressured his 50-year-old wife into getting a cosmetic facelift she did not want. When she finally agreed, Martin, using his standing as a fellow physician, arranged for her to be sent home with a powerful combination of prescription medications. The surgeon who wrote those prescriptions would later say the mix was outside his usual routine, and that he only agreed because a fellow doctor had requested it. McKelly was frightened during her recovery. She believed her husband was having an affair, and she worried about the medication she was being given. She trusted one person above all others, her daughter Alexis, a medical student, who stepped in to dispense the drugs herself. McKelly recovered enough that Alexis felt safe returning to school. He thought he had committed the perfect crime, and his behavior afterward was staggering. Within weeks, he moved his mistress, Gypsy Willis, into the family home, introducing her to his grieving children as their new nanny. I am still with you, because this is exactly where most killers walk free, and this is where one family refused to let that happen. Mikhail's daughters did not believe the accident story for a single moment. Alexis and her sisters launched a relentless, years-long campaign for justice. They pushed investigators, they gathered evidence, they exposed the affair, and they unraveled their father's long history of lies. Because of them, the case was reopened, and when the medical examiner took a second look at the toxicology, the picture changed. Prosecutors came to believe Michelle had been heavily drugged and then drowned, and a chief prosecutor called it, in his words, an almost perfect murder, because Martin had pumped her full of drugs he knew would be hard to detect after death. Then Martin's own ego finished the job for them. While awaiting trial, he bragged about the killing to fellow inmates, even telling one that he was getting away with murdering his wife. In 2013, after a trial that became a national sensation, a jury convicted Martin MacNeill of first-degree murder and obstruction of justice. He was later separately convicted of sexually abusing his adult daughter. A judge handed down consecutive sentences, 15 years to life for the murder, with additional time on the other counts, ensuring that in all likelihood, he would die behind bars. He did not last long there. After exhausting his appeals, Martin MacNeill took his own life in prison in April of 2017. The untouchable doctor who thought a medical degree made him smarter than everyone in the room was exposed completely. And Michaela MacNeill is remembered not as a tragic accident, but as a mother whose daughters loved her enough to fight for the truth for 6 long years and win. Case 3. The Mornington Monster. John Sharpe. Picture a heartbroken father standing in front of television cameras, holding up a photograph of his beautiful pregnant wife and his smiling baby daughter. Tears run down his face as he begs the public for any news of his missing family. An entire country aches for him, but every word is a lie. He is not a desperate father waiting for his family to come home. He already knows exactly where they are, because he is the one who took them. To the outside world, John Sharpe and his wife, Anna Kemp, lived an ordinary life in the coastal Melbourne suburb of Mornington, Australia. Anna, originally from Dunedin, New Zealand, was devoted to her family. She was pregnant with their second child, and their little daughter Gracie, not yet 2 years old, was the center of her world. John worked as a conveyancer and was seen by neighbors as quiet and unremarkable. But behind closed doors, John Sharpe nursed a deep, hidden resentment. When Anna became pregnant again in late 2003, he did not feel joy. He decided, in his own twisted thinking, that one child was already more than he wanted, and he began to plan something unthinkable. His premeditation was chilling in its patience. In 2003, John walked into a local sporting goods store and bought a high-powered spear gun, a weapon he had never shown any interest in before, along with an extra spear. He practiced with it in his own backyard. On the night of the 23rd of March, 2004, after an argument, Anna fell asleep. John retrieved the weapon and took his wife's life as she slept, then concealed her body. And then he did something that reveals exactly who he was. He did not flee. He went downstairs and slept on the sofa, and the next morning he buried Anna in a shallow grave in the backyard. But he still had what he coldly viewed as a problem. For 4 days, little Gracie remained in the house, and John played the role of a single father, feeding her and putting her to bed. And then he made a decision that stands among the darkest in this entire collection. To carry it out, he needed more spears, so he put his toddler in the car and took her with him to the same store, buying the very thing he would use to end her short life. On the 27th of March, 4 days after killing his wife, John Sharpe murdered his own daughter. Some of his relatives would later come to believe Anna had discovered him harming Gracie, and that he killed his family to bury that secret. Whatever drove him, the result was the same. He treated the people who trusted him most as obstacles to a race. Stay with me, because his arrogance is what brought the whole thing down. After disposing of the remains, John began an elaborate cover-up. He told Anna's family she had simply run off, and he used her bank card and even sent fake emails pretending to be her, telling her loved ones to stop looking. But he had badly misjudged Anna's mother, Lily Gebler, back in New Zealand. She knew her daughter. Anna did not communicate that way, preferring regular phone calls, and the strange, out-of-character messages did not reassure her. They alarmed her, and she went straight to the police. Investigators traced those fake emails to a computer inside John's own home. When forensic teams searched the house, chemical testing lit up with blood evidence in the bedroom and the nursery, and in the backyard they found the empty shallow grave. They also found a receipt for a chainsaw, tarpaulins, and tape. John Sharpe maintained his innocence for 3 full months, even weeping for the cameras. He only broke when detectives sat him down and told him plainly what they had found. He confessed in a flat, detached voice, even trying to excuse himself by claiming a kind of madness had taken over him. In 2005, he pleaded guilty to both murders. The judge described the crimes as singular in their barbarity, and said John had killed his own daughter, simply so his first crime would not be discovered. He was sentenced to 2 life terms with a minimum of 33 years, before any chance of parole, which means he will not even be eligible until the year 2037. Anna and Gracie Kemp deserved a long, ordinary, happy life. The least we can do is refuse to let the man who took it be the one we remember. Case 4. The Deadly Dentist, Barton Corbin. Imagine a successful, wealthy dentist. He fixes smiles all day, drives home to a beautiful house in an upscale neighborhood, and looks, to everyone around him, like a pillar of the community. But beneath that polished surface is a fragile, dangerous ego, a man who cannot stand to be left. And when the women in his life decide they want out, he does not let them walk away. He stages their deaths to look like they did it to themselves, and for 14 years, he gets away with it. The story begins in 1990, at the Medical College of Georgia in Augusta, where Barton Corbin was a dental student. He dated a brilliant fellow student named Dorothy Hearn, known to everyone as Dolly. As their relationship soured, Dolly saw the danger in him. He was possessive, jealous, and controlling. And when she tried to leave, he refused to accept it. He stalked her. He vandalized her car. He broke into her apartment. Dolly was so frightened that she told the people around her, plainly, that if anything ever happened to her, Bart Corbin was responsible. On the 6th of June 1990, Dolly Hearn was found dead in her apartment from a single gunshot wound, a handgun resting nearby. Despite her warnings and her family's certainty that she would never take her own life, and despite the fact that the local office had no blood spatter experts and the gun had been moved before the scene could be properly documented, her death was ruled a suicide. Bart Corbin walked away free, finished dental school, and built a wealthy life. Fast forward 14 years. By 2004, Bart was a successful dentist living in Beaufort, Georgia, married to a beloved preschool teacher named Jennifer Corbin, with 2 young sons. But inside that home, Jennifer was miserable and controlled, and she had begun an online relationship that gave her the courage to imagine leaving. The person she thought she had fallen for online turned out to be someone using a false identity, and when the truth came out, Jennifer was heartbroken. But she still wanted out of her marriage. When Bart discovered the messages and realized his wife was leaving him, his ego could not take it. Just 5 days before her death, he filed for divorce and sued for sole custody of their boys. Stay with me, because this is where his past finally caught up with him. On the 4th of December 2004, Jennifer Corbin was found dead in her bed from a single gunshot wound, a handgun placed nearby, and divorce papers staged around her, made to look exactly like the suicide of a depressed, divorcing mother. And in an act of pure cruelty, Bart had left the home for the night, fully aware that his young son would be the one to find her the next morning. Bart expected the police to take one look and call it a suicide, exactly as they had in 1990. But this time, detectives looked closer. The staging was clumsy. The scene did not match a self-inflicted death, and when investigators dug into the grieving husband's past and uncovered the death of Dolly Hearn, the entire case cracked open. 2 women, both leaving Bart Corbin, both found dead from a single gunshot to the head, with a gun placed conveniently nearby. The similarities were impossible to explain as coincidence. The forensic evidence destroyed his story. Blood pattern analysts re-examined Dolly's case and concluded her body had been moved and the scene staged, that it was not a suicide at all. And the trail in Jennifer's death led straight to a friend named Richard Wilson in Troy, Alabama. Cell phone records placed Bart in Troy days before the murder, and when investigators pressed Wilson, he admitted he had handed Bart the very handgun used to kill Jennifer. Facing 2 separate murder trials and the real possibility of the death penalty, the arrogant dentist finally broke. 4 days into jury selection, in September of 2006, Barton Corbin stood in court and pleaded guilty to the murders of both Jennifer Corbin and Dolly Hearn. He was sentenced to 2 life terms. Prosecutors made clear they did not believe he would ever realistically walk free. For Dolly Hearn's family, who had spent more than 14 years being told their daughter took her own life, the guilty plea was the truth they had been denied for so long. 2 brilliant young women, years and miles apart, connected by one cowardly man who could not bear to be left. They are remembered now not as he tried to paint them, but as exactly who they were. Case 5. The grieving husband on camera. Stephen Grant. Picture the perfect grieving husband. He sits in his comfortable suburban living room, surrounded by news cameras, his voice breaking as he begs the public to help find his missing wife. He hands out flyers. He gives interviews. He even points the finger at the police, accusing them of not doing enough to bring his family back together. A whole community breaks its heart for him, but the entire performance is a lie, and the answer to where his wife has gone is hidden much closer to home than anyone watching could imagine. Stephen and Tara Grant lived in Washington Township, Michigan, an upscale community north of Detroit. Tara was 34, a sharp and successful consultant for a major firm, whose career took her traveling often. She was the family's main provider, the income behind their beautiful home. Stephen, by contrast, stayed home with their 2 young children, a 7-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son, while helping out at his father's tool and die shop. Their household also included a 19-year-old au pair from Germany named Verena Dierkes. To outsiders, it looked like a modern, functioning family. But Stephen had grown to deeply resent his wife's success and her frequent absences, and that resentment had curdled into something far more dangerous. On the night of the 9th of February, 2007, Tara returned home from a work trip, and an argument erupted over her constant travel. In that confrontation, Stephen took his wife's life inside their own home, while their children slept upstairs. What he did afterward turned a tragedy into something the whole nation would struggle to comprehend. Over the following days, he concealed and disposed of her remains, scattering them at a nearby park called Stony Creek Metro Park, and then he began to perform. I am still here, and this is the part that made the case infamous. Stephen waited 5 full days before he ever reported Tara missing, finally calling the sheriff's office on Valentine's Day. He told them a story. He said that after their argument, Tara had climbed into a dark-colored car waiting at the end of the driveway and simply vanished into the night. And then he weaponized that lie. He invited the news crews in. He cried on camera. He talked about his children's tears, and he loudly accused the police of harassing an innocent, grieving husband. For weeks, the performance held, but investigators were not convinced, and the pressure was building. Then Stephen made a fatal mistake. Learning that police were planning to search the park where he had scattered the remains, he panicked, returned, and recovered part of his wife's body, hiding it inside a container in the garage of their family home, right under the noses of the investigators who kept visiting. On the 2nd of March, 2007, detectives arrived with a search warrant. The moment they began going through the property, the confident, media-savvy husband cracked. He borrowed a friend's pickup truck and fled. When officers opened the garage, they found the container, and the illusion Stephen had spent weeks building collapsed in an instant. A massive manhunt followed. Police tracked his cell phone more than 200 miles north, into the frozen wilderness of northern Michigan. He had abandoned the truck and fled on foot into a state park, where he spent a night in brutal, sub-freezing cold, with almost no protection, carrying alcohol, pills, and a fake gun, intending to end his own life. Search teams found him hiding beneath a fallen tree, suffering from severe frostbite and hypothermia, and he was airlifted to a hospital. And it was there, in that hospital bed, with the bravado finally gone, that Stephen Grant gave a detailed, recorded confession. At trial, the jury heard that 3-hour confession in his own words. Despite the elaborate cover-up, they returned a verdict of second-degree murder, deciding the killing itself had not been planned in advance. But the sentencing judge made her view of the crime unmistakable. The prosecutor called Stephen Grant evil personified, and the judge deviated upward from the standard guidelines, sentencing him to 50 to 80 years in prison for the murder, with additional time for the mutilation of his wife's body. He will not be eligible for release until he is an old man. He spent weeks playing the heartbroken hero on national television, and he will spend the rest of his life remembered as the man who performed grief for the cameras while hiding the truth in his own garage. Tara Grant was a daughter, a sister, and a devoted mother of 2, and she is the one who deserves to be remembered here. 5 men. 5 ordinary lives that were never really ordinary at all. A millionaire who turned his own backyard into a graveyard. A doctor who used his credentials as a weapon. A husband who took his family and then wept for the cameras. A dentist who could not bear to be left. And a man who performed his grief on national television. What ties them together is not just what they did, but how easily they hid it, behind nice homes, respected jobs, and the trust of the people closest to them. The real horror of these stories is how normal these men looked, right up until the moment the truth came out. But in every single one of these cases, the lie did not hold. A survivor who wrote down a license plate. Daughters who refused to give up. A grandmother who knew her own child. A second death that finally exposed the first. A confession in a hospital bed. The truth is patient, and it has a way of surfacing. If one of these cases stayed with you, tell me in the comments which one, and let me know where in the world you are watching from right now. If you believe these victims deserve to be remembered, do me one favor before you go. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell, because here at Dark Truth Crime, we say their names.